Hi, welcome back to my channel and to this next video on the hagercad video series. In the last videos we took a look at an example project and there we created the whole documentation that is necessary for the electrical installation. So we created the electrical diagram as well as the enclosure diagram. And there we noticed that we can only use or mainly use Hager devices, but not devices from other manufacturers. So this means you can't use other manufacturers within hagercad, or? Well, in this video I want to show you how you can do this. So how we can create products in the product catalog of hagercad so that we can use it for the electrical diagram as well as for the enclosure diagram. And we will do all of this after the intro. So in order to create devices for the product catalog of hagercad, there are mainly two options that you have. The first option is the easy option. There you already use predefined symbols from hagercad that you can just use to configure the device that you need. This, for example, is fully sufficient if you want to have, let's say, an KNX switching actuator with 24 outputs, but Hager doesn't have any actuator with those amount of outputs. Then you can use this easy mode to create an actuator with 24 outputs to use it to document it. Then the second option is a little bit more work. There you create these symbols all by yourself, or you can sometimes also import the 2D drawings from the manufacturer of the device that you want to add to the product catalog. And then you can use this predefined symbol to use it within hagercad. In this video, I want to show you both options that you have. And therefore, we first of all start with the easy option. So therefore, I'm back here inside of hagercad, and now I don't need any project, but instead I will go here to the tools. And now here we have the user information, so the user database. And if I click on it, you can see that here we have different databases that we can choose from, and we want to take a look at the products page. If I open up the manufacturer page, you can already see that there currently only is one manufacturer by default added to those products. What we can do now is that we can edit this database to add new manufacturers to it. So for example, if I right click on this top manufacturer here, I create a new manufacturer which gets the name example manufacturer. And with that we have created our first manufacturer within the database of hagercad. Now, in order to associate devices to this manufacturer, you again have to click on New when you have marked the manufacturer. And now you have to add so-called groups to this manufacturer. So these groups later on define the type of device that you can add to it. Now here you sometimes just have to search for the group that could fit to the device that you want to add. So in this case I want to add a KNX switching actuator with 5 outputs, which just isn't produced by Hager. So therefore I search for a bus. And there you can see here we have installation bus system, and here we should see switching actuators or switch actuators for bus systems. I click here on add, then I can close this window. And here you can now see that we have added this installation bus system category with switching actuator for bus systems. And now within this category or subcategory, I can now create devices. So therefore I click again here on new. And now you can see here on the bottom part of this window, we created a new device. So here, first of all, hagercad wants me to define a reference, which typically is the product number. So I just use any number here. Then the description. So switching actuator 5-volt. Then we can also add, for example, an EIN code and much more information to this device. Now if you click here on this only the mandatory properties, you can already guess it, then hagercad only shows the properties that are used by hagercad for calculations, so for example for the heating calculation, etc. Now that I have added the description, I want to specify the symbol for the electrical diagram. And so therefore I click here on symbol, where we currently have undefined, and then a new window appears. And now here we can create so-called symbol groups. Symbol group in this case just means that you can have multiple symbols for your device. We already saw that for KNX devices, where we have different symbols that we can use for this actuator. And now I typically create a new group here, and the name of it I always start with the manufacturer, so in this case example manufacturer, and then either the product number or the product description. And now that I have specified the name, I can start to add symbols to this symbol group. So I want to use them from the general library, not the personal library, because there I have to add the symbols manually. But instead I want to use the symbols that hagercad already created. So what we first of all need is, for example, a bus system device with the supply voltage of our bus. So the KNX 30 volts DC. So I click here on add so that we have this symbol for our 5-volt switching actuator. And then, well, then we just need our contacts. So for example, here those normally open contact. And I want to have 5 of them. So I click 5 times here on add. So now you can see we have the bus connector and then 5 of those switching contacts. Now we can also specify the terminal label. So for example, here I don't want to have 1, 2, but instead KNX minus and KNX plus. And here I want to start 1, 2, then 3, 4, 5, 6. And with that we have labeled the terminals of this device. So now that I have configured my symbol group, I can add it and select it. And with that we already have a symbol for our electrical diagram. But we still need a symbol for our enclosure diagram. And therefore here we have this part which is called layout symbol. If I double click on it, you can already see that here we also have sort of symbol groups that are basically 3D models. And now you could import 3D models in a DWG format, but typically the models that you import have too much information on it, so hagercad can't really show it correctly. So therefore what I do is I will use such a placeholder device with the number of modules that is used by it. So for example, for this 5-volt switching actuator, I want to have a device with 4 of such module spaces. So I click here on select, and with that we have created our first device to this database. Now I also want to create, for example, an RCBO which only has a width of 1 module. So therefore I add a new group to my example manufacturer. Here clicking on new. And then I search for circuit breaker. Now here you really have to trial and error to find the right category, because based on the category that you choose from, you have different symbols. Because you won't have any bus connector for the circuit breaker. Now I already tried a little bit, and for the RCBO I can use the miniature circuit breaker with auxiliary device. Now I click on add, and here within this category we can create an RCBO which only has a width of 1 module. And this might not be that important, but if you think about it, when we want to calculate the heating of our enclosure, this is really important, because on a normal DIN rail mounting you can place down 12 devices. So with a width of only 1 module, you now have 2 RCBOs that can produce heat instead of only 6 RCBOs that can produce heat. So therefore this is really important. Now here I can create a new device like we just did for the switching actuator. which I will give a new name, a new description, so RCBO I will just call it, and then we can again define the symbol group. Now here I can click on new. Again, I will start with example manufacturer and then the product number. And now from here below, you can now specify the symbol that you want for your circuit breaker. So here you have different symbol types. So I want to use a circuit breaker with 2 poles. Click on add. And now to add the RCD to this symbol, you have to scroll down, and here down below you can find RCD add-on block. Now this doesn't mean that you have 2 symbols that you later on place down, but instead this just means that this additional symbol will get drawn here to this MCB, so that you then basically have an RCBO. So after finishing it, I again click on add and on select. So now let's try those new devices in a little example project. So therefore I first of all click here on save, and then I will quickly create a new project. Now here I'm within a new project and in the automatic mode, and there I now want to place down my just created custom devices. So therefore I click here on the user catalog, and here you can already see that we have a new manufacturer here, example manufacturer. Now let us start with the circuit breaker. So I click here on the green plus symbol. Then I can specify the number of circuit breakers that I want to place down. So for example, 4 of them. Click on add. And now here you can already see that the devices got placed down correctly. And now if I also want to place down, for example, my switching actuator, I again just click here on the green plus symbol. Click on add. And also here you can see we have the bus connector and then 5 of those switching contacts. So let us take a look at the diagram itself. And here you can now see that we have an RCBO. So if I place down a normal RCBO, we should see the same symbol. So board devices, main switch, modular protection devices, RCBO. Click on add. Just make sure that we have it on the same page. And then we can click on diagram. And there you can already see that here we have the same symbol itself, but now instead just with our own device with a width of only 1 module. And if I take a look at the second page, well, here you can see the switching contacts of our switching actuator. Here you can see the bus module, also with the correct name, KNX- and KNX+. And here we have the cross-reference of those switching contacts. Now, what I also want to take a look at is the enclosure. So therefore I will quickly start the automatic mode. Just click on next so that we can see the devices. And here you can see that we first of all have our switching actuator, and now what you can't see is the custom RCBO, and this is because I just forgotten to specify a 3D symbol. So I save this project and go back to my user catalog. So now back within the user catalog, you can already see that here we have the layout symbol undefined. So I click here and choose the 1 module width, and then quickly save it, and I go back to my project. And now I guess I have to add the RCBOs again so that the correct model gets imported. So therefore I just go back into the user catalog and add a new device here so that you can see that we really get a 3D model. So I click here on add, place it down, and with that you can see that we also have a 3D model for the RCBO. Now of course these models aren't that detailed like the Hager models, but I think that's fully sufficient for this enclosure diagram because they also get the correct name so that we can distinguish between them, and what really matters is the right size for the device so that you can use it, for example, here for the temperature rise calculation. So now you saw the easy way. Let us now take a look at the more complex way. So let's say, for example, that you have a switching actuator, again, like a 5-volt switching actuator, but you want to have a specific symbol within hagercad. So for example, the symbol of the module itself, and not those different symbols, so these contacts and the bus connector as their own symbol. Well, you can also do this. Therefore, you can either import a 2D drawing from the device, or what I recommend is that you draw it within hagercad. Therefore, to draw it, I will create a new distribution here inside of my project, which I will just use in order to draw my own symbols. So there I don't want the enclosure calculation, but instead I want to go into the diagram mode, then the manual mode. And what I will do now is that I will draw down the device or the symbol that I will later on use. And therefore I have already downloaded a symbol of a switching actuator by the manufacturer of MDT, which I will now import to show you what is the difficulty by using the existing symbols that you can download from those manufacturers. So in order to use such a symbol, the symbol itself has to be in the format of DWG. And to import it, I click here on Drawing, and there I can insert a DWG block. So I click here on it, then on Import, and then I specify the folder where the file itself sits in. Now here I downloaded a symbol of an MDT switching actuator, so this one, and I click here on Open. Then I click on OK, and now I place down this symbol here on my page. With that I can close this here, and there we have the symbol from the MDT actuator imported into hagercad. But the problem with this imported symbol is, if I draw down the wires, you can already see that it is not always guaranteed that you can place them down exactly in the middle of those terminals, or even close to those terminals. So for example here, if you take a look at it, now as you can see here, we have a lot of space between the connections. So that really isn't that useful. Therefore, I will draw the device here with the tools of hagercad, which I can do here with those drawing tools. So therefore I will start here with this rectangle and try to get the dimensions of this device here. So maybe like this here, then inside of it, and now I won't draw here this additional part of the device because I want to have my terminals directly here so that the symbol itself isn't that big of a size. And now here I will start to draw the terminals. So A, then I will leave a space of one terminal and start with the next. So with that I have finished that, and you can see that the space here between this terminal here and the outer marking isn't the same. So therefore I will move it just a little bit to the right, like that, and also this middle part here, and maybe make this a little bit bigger lengthwise. So for example 75 instead of 65. Or maybe let's say 70. I think 75 is a little bit too big. Yeah, I think that fits pretty well. And also this here in the middle, I will also change to 70. And then we have those terminals here on top. Now we still need the terminals in the bottom part, and therefore I just copy two of them here and place them down here, and we can already see that also the height currently isn't correct. So I will change it here, maybe to 65, I think. That was a little bit too tall, so 62.5. And that's the right space. So now, before I start to draw more, I first of all want to check if I can hook up the wires itself to the correct position here. So I start by drawing some wires here, and you can already see that this just fits fine. And now here, instead of the original symbol, also the connection is directly connected to the device and also always in the middle of those terminals. So the next thing that I want to do is that I want to give those terminals a name. So therefore I go back to drawing, now to text, and here I will start to label those terminals. Now I will change the font style to Arial Bold and maybe make it a little bit smaller. Yeah, like this, and rotated it so that we have it in this way. And you can currently see now that I can't place it in the middle of it. So therefore I go back here to displays and change the grid to, let's say, 1 millimeter. And now with that you can see that I can place down the label in the middle of it. And with that I just go ahead and create all of those markings. So now I have finished these markings here on top, but I think the size is a little bit too big. So therefore I will mark them and I will change the font to, let's say, 2. I think that's a little bit better, or maybe 2.5. Yeah, that's definitely better. And I will place them back in the middle of it. I think that's just fine. And now I also want to label the KNX connection with KNX plus. Also go down with the font to, let's say, 2 now, and KNX minus. And I see I have to move them around. And what I also want to do is that I want to give those terminals their respective color. And in order to color those rectangles, I have to mark one of them. And then here I can click on this hatching tool. And with this hatching tool, I can now define a color and sort of an hatching layer to it. So here I can define the different types. And I just want to have the solid hatching. And here I will define the color to red on the plus side. And I will do the same thing again here on the left side, and here it should be black. And what I will do again is that I will draw here around this terminal with a black line so that the outline is a little bit better. So now I think that looks just fine. The next thing that I want to add is, let's say, for example, the MDT logo, just as a text symbol here. Let's say a little bit bigger. So for example 5. Place it down. And then also the description of the device. So AMS minus 0416. And here you can see I can also create new lines within one text block. Now here I will use the Hager default style and make the size of it a little bit smaller. Or let's say I will use Calibri, I think, which looks a little bit better. So let's say maybe here. And now the last thing that I want to add, I don't want to make it that detailed like here where we also have the manual buttons, etc. But I want to indicate that those terminal blocks here in between are switching contacts. And I will do this by zooming in and then creating such a contact with the line tool. So maybe like this way here. Here we have the contact, and here we go back onto the terminal, and this I can just copy and paste onto the other contacts so that I don't have to draw it over and over again. And I think that looks fine to use it for my diagram. Of course, you can be much more creative than I was here for this case, but I think you saw the process of creating such a own symbol. Now I can delete everything And I will also delete the imported symbol as well as those wires here. And now before I start to export it as a model that I can use for the product editor, I also prepared another device which I quickly will import here. So here you can see another device which I have already drawn with hagercad to use it in my diagrams. So here we have the GIRA X1. So here I have, for example, the label in the terminal itself. And here I have also, for example, drawn down the Ethernet connectors and the micro SD slot. And those two models I now want to use within the custom manufacturers. So in order to do that, I first of all have to export those two symbols as a DVG file. Therefore, I mark it and then click here on Create a block. And now I have to specify sort of a starting point, and I typically choose the upper left corner of the device. And now I can export this file. I will use MDT AMS 041602 as a name. And for the X1 I will do the exact same thing. So mark everything, create a block, then the starting point, and now here I will call it GIRA X1. And with that I can close down this window here. And now instead of going into the user database, I first of all want to go into this electrical symbols editor. Because here I will now import those DWG files in order to use it later on when we create the product. So here I will now click on import a symbol, and here I have to choose the correct one. So first of all the switching actuator. Now I have to give it a name, and I typically use this format. So first user, then the manufacturer, and then the device number. Now I click on OK, and now here you can see the device that we just created. But we aren't finished now, because now we need to tell hagercad where the connection points are. And therefore here we have this button on top, and if I click on it, I can now start to define the connection points. And in order to place them down on the correct position, I display the grid, click here on Snap to Grid, as well as Snap to Objects. And with that you can now see that we can place down those connection points more precisely. So always within the middle of those terminals. Now that I have placed them down, I first of all have to click Escape, so that those terminals or these connection points here get created. And now I could give those connection points a new name. So let's say, for example, this first connection point here isn't called 1 but instead A. And to do that I have to click here on the attributes, here terminal code P1, and here I have to set this value here to A. And now you can see that the terminal code number is the same like the terminal label which I just drew. I won't do this now because this really doesn't bother me for now. I think you saw how you can do this, because later on you will only see here this number. You won't see here this P1. And if you like it, you can give here this the same name as the terminal itself. So now that we have finished this, you can already see that here we have another point which wasn't drawn by us. But what does that mean? Well, this black point here means there we will later see the cross references. So for example, if we create switching contacts for this device and we place them down on another page, there these cross references will appear. And here on the left hand side, this minus is the label of the device itself later on in the electrical diagram. So now that I've done this for this actuator, I will also do it for the X1. So I click here on Save and import a new symbol. Now the GIRA X1, again with a new name. And now here it should be a little bit faster. And now here I won't create connection points for those Ethernet connectors, because you are currently able to draw Ethernet wires, but you currently can't tell hagercad which type of connection these connection points are. So whether they are an electrical connection or if they are an Ethernet connection. This at the moment of recording just isn't possible, therefore I won't draw connection points here down below. Now that I have created those symbols, I can close this window after saving it. and then go into the user information and create those two new manufacturers. So into products, and there I first of all will create MDT. And here we already know the group that we need. So I search for bus, and then here down below we have switch actuator for bus system. Click on add. And now here within we create a new device. So AMS 0416.02 is the reference, and the description is switching actuator 4-fold with current measuring. Now in this case I won't define the other properties, but instead I only will define here the symbol. Now here again I have to create a new symbol group. So I will call it MDT underline and then the product name, so AMS 0416. And now here, instead of using the general library, I will now use the personal library. And here you can already see that we have this switching actuator or the symbol here that we just created. So here I click on add, and with that, this symbol can now be used. Now what you can also do is that you can add switching contacts to it that you can place on other pages. But what currently also isn't possible is, like we saw it for example for the existing KNX products, that we can choose between multiple styles for one contact. So for example a switching actuator that can be also used as a blind actuator. There for the Hager products we had different styles for one contact, and when you used one style of it you couldn't use the other style. Now here with those custom symbols this can't be done. So you can create multiple styles for one connection, but here hagercad won't stop the user from using multiple symbols in the electrical diagram for the same contact, for example. So therefore I won't add them here to this device, so I will only use this custom symbol here. And after adding it, I can click here on it and select it. And now the only thing that is missing is the layout symbol. I think it was 4 modules wide. Now with that we have created the MDT actuator. Next up is the GIRA X1. So therefore I also create the new manufacturer, and within it we can create the group. And now I will use here for example this logic component for bus system for this X1. I think this is the closest. I think this is the group that fits the X1 the best. And here I will just do the exact same. Now here first of all the product number, then the description. And then you already know the workflow, so I create a new symbol group and I will name it GIRA X1. And I will use the personal library with my own symbol here. Click on add and then selecting it. Now here I also need to specify the model for the enclosure diagram. Now in this case it is 2 modules wide. And after adding those two devices I can save it, and let's take a look if everything worked as we expected it. So I am back here in this example project, and here I will now add the X1 and the switching actuator that we just created. If I click here on add in the automatic mode, you will see that for your custom symbols hagercad isn't able on placing them down in the automatic mode. So therefore it is placing them down in the project store, and you can later on use it either in the manual mode or if you place it down in the control sheet. Next up I will also add the switching actuator. Now here we have the same warning, and therefore I will create a new control sheet, and within the control sheet, if I go into the diagram view, you can now see that I can place down the devices the way I want and I can easily use them. So what I can do now is, for example, I can draw the wire between the KNX contacts here of those two devices. And you can see that hagercad is recognizing those connections that we just created in this symbol editor. So this is how you can create custom symbols for hagercad. So that's that for this video and the video series on the topic of hagercad. With this video series you got to know a great tool to help you to create your diagrams for your electrical installation. I hope you enjoyed this video series. If so, consider a like and subscribe to the channel to get notified for new videos. If you have any questions left, feel free to ask me in the comment section down below. And I'm excited to see you in the next video and the next video series.